Afternoon, everybody. It's bi-monthly contracts class. And last week we went over disclosures. I think the week before that we went over the RPA. So I thought this week we would cover listing agreements. It's kind of rare that anybody goes over listing agreements, so I think it's a good thing to do. And let me share my screen. So let's see. Um, you should be seeing my transactions.
I see a disclosure regarding real estate
Yes,
agents.
that's it.
Okay.
That's it. Thank you, Patricia. So this is when you pull up from Zip Forms the listing agreement. This is the very first thing that you will see. And this document is the first thing that's presented to a client in many different areas. When you make an offer, when you're listing a property, when you're leasing a property. And what this is a statute that's required by the state that you disclose to your client the different types of agencies. There's a seller's agent, there's a buyer's agent, and there's dual agencies, and what the duties of those various agencies are. And that's a requirement of the law. So that's all this form does. But really the most important form that you will have, because you have to establish that relationship with your client. And that is an agency relationship, because that moving forward shows that you have this relationship with that person. It matters in procuring cause cases. Now with clear cooperation, many MLSs, CRMLS, I know for sure, they require within the last 12 months, the definition of a client is anybody that has signed an agency relationship um, with you. And it's not with you personally, it's with the brokerage. So it's with Keller Williams Calabasas, if you're in the Calabasas office, or Keller Williams West Side, if you're in the West Side office, or Coastal Properties, whatever Keller Williams brokerage you're with, it's with that whole brokerage. So it's not only with you personally, it's with the brokerage. So so once again, that's all this form is doing, is it is teaching, it is disclosing to the client that there are different types of agencies and what the responsibilities are in those agencies. So, and then the second page of this form is the actual code in the state legislature of the requirement. So, and you'll see down here it says confirmation, and you will see that this is the second part of the statute, in that the first is informing the client of the different types of relationships, and then the second is a confirmation of the relationship. So you are confirming that the seller brokerage is this brokerage and the buyer's brokerage is this brokerage, and who represents what. So you'll see that in the RPA. So then the next form is the possible representation of more than one buyer or seller, disclosure and consent. Now, once again, we're talking about the brokerage. So I had somebody leave me a message today about a tenant who didn't really want to sign this because it really has nothing to do with them. That it really that he's their agent and he's only representing them. But that's not the case, because once again, we're talking about the brokerage. So other agents in the same brokerage could be submitting an application for lease um, on that very same property, and we need to disclose that to this tenant. So why it says seller and buyer, they should be changing this, but anyways, because that's confusing to we ask tenants to and landlords to sign this, but that's what this form is about. That the brokerage may represent other people for that same property. The brokerage may have like properties available. So that's what you're disclosing here. The next is wire fraud and electronic funds transfer advisory. It's very important in regards to a sale of property. About wire fraud is rampant. Um, the default in the contract is that funds are wired directly to escrow, and that's our preference. It's our preference that it's wired directly to escrow, because the minute we as real estate agents touch a check, the minute that check is touched, we have to account for it, meaning it has to be logged into a trust log, and the handling of that check is really really important. So we don't want to touch checks. We want to wire, but wiring has its own issues in that there are those bad people out there who monitor your emails. They don't hack your email account. They just watch your email account. They look at how you communicate, how you text, because they can look at your text, how you phrase things, your phrasing, and then they wait for their opportunity. And when that opportunity presents itself, they send an email or a text to your client and say, we've had a change of where you need to wire your funds, and you need to wire them here. And your client innocently wires them to where they think you directed them to, and their money is gone. And in some respects, it's gone forever. There are some banks who can reverse that if it's found out, but for the most part, that money is gone. That client has now lost their money. So it's really important that you go over this with your client, that you will never, ever send wiring instructions, and you are to never, ever send wiring instructions. Those only come from escrow, and you inform your client that they need to call escrow to verify where the funds have to be wired by talking to somebody on the phone. So this is really, really, really important. So here's the agreement. This is the listing agreement right here. So the date prepared is really important, because that date prepared is pulled on other forms. So you may prepare it today, but then the beginning listing date, and we only do exclusive authorization to right to sell. That's that we are the only people who have the right to sell this property. We're exclusive. So the exclusive right to sell, the seller hereby grants the brokerage. The listing belongs to the brokerage, not to the agent specifically. It belongs to the brokerage, and there's a beginning date and an end date. Now, a lot of times everybody says, well, we don't know when it's going to end. I'm sorry, but you need to put an end date. Not a valid contract without a beginning date or an end date. So if you prepare it today, but the beginning of the listing doesn't happen until a week from today because you're going to be doing some things, guess what? I don't recommend that. And here's why. Because in that time, from when you prepare it and the listing starts, you don't have a valid listing agreement. So your seller is at a party. Well, not now because of COVID, but he's talking to somebody over the phone, a friend of his over the phone, saying, we're putting our place up for sale. It's going to be ready. Hey, I know I have this real estate agent who was just talking to me about selling my house, but that he had a buyer, but I'm not selling. So, hey, I'm going to give him your number and and have him talk to you. So that agent talks to your client during this period when you don't have a valid listing agreement and brings the buyer, probably signs a single party compensation agreement, for that specific buyer. And what happens? He sells it in that week that you don't have the listing. So how do you handle that? Well, the listing starts, I suggest, on the day that the listing is signed. And if you have things that need to be done, you could put it in coming soon and not show it until that's done, because coming soon doesn't accumulate days on market. You can exclude it from the MLS for that time period. And once again, it doesn't accumulate any days on market. Theoretically, it doesn't. That would accumulate. I'm sorry, I'm speaking out loud, and it would accumulate if it does eventually go on the MLS. It would accumulate those days on market. So the better way is to do a coming soon, because there are no days on market then. So that's the way to do it. The next thing is the address, the parcel number. If it's a manufactured home, you're going to check that box. If it's sold in probate or conservatorship or guardianship, you check that box. And then here's the nitty gritty: the list price. You put in a dollar amount, it's going to automatically write out what that price is. You determine what the list price is. The listing terms. Now, what goes in listing terms? Well, a couple of things that could go here is that should you, as the agent, represent both sides, your commission will be reduced. Another thing is, should the seller care to cancel? Because I want to point out in section number 1, right here, after the listing period, the exclusive and irrevocable right to sell or exchange the real property. The key word there is irrevocable, because every seller thinks, well, I can just cancel it whenever I want to. That's not the case. It's up to the broker whether to release that listing or not. So if canceling really is important to your seller, you would write it into the listing terms that if the seller wants to cancel, he can cancel within 48 hours or giving you 48 hours or 24 hours. You can also write that he will pay you, reimburse you for your marketing fees, or those terms would go in that amount. Then regarding compensation, this bolded thing is very important when we're talking about commissions. Commissions are negotiable. Now, they are not set in stone. It's like, oh no, we only take 6%, we only take this percent, that percent. No, it's negotiable. And so you negotiate with your seller as to what the commission is. And this is the commission to be paid, to the total commission to be paid. And keeping in mind that if this listing is going in the MLS, we as a company require that 2.5% is offered to the cooperating broker. So above that, is what, if there is a cooperating broker, is what your compensation would be. I would like to caution you that I don't think anybody should be a discount broker. There are those discount brokers out there who only charge the seller 1%, but they don't do anything for their 1%. They put it on the MLS and that's it. They have other people show it. They have other people have their open houses when there are open houses. I don't recommend you being a discount broker. I think you're worth your money. Look, you're probably spending for photos, you're putting together a marketing plan. This all is costs money. You know, time. Your time is worth a lot. So I suggest you ask for a good commission. Um, so so that's my thing on commission. So also in the
Rich, can I interrupt real quick with a
sure,
question?
absolutely.
Uh,
Sure.
Bruce wanted to know where can we find parcel numbers?
Parcel numbers. Well, parcel numbers, you can find parcel numbers. There's a program called Realist. Most MLSs have a link to that app, or not app, but it's a program, and it pulls from the county records. You can search by addresses, and then it'll give you the parcel number. So that's where you find the parcel number. Um, and it may even, I'm going to just, no, sorry. So there you go, Bruce. So that's in regards to the compensation. It's usually a percentage. It could be a flat dollar amount. And you see an and there. Um, you can you can add marketing fees there if you wanted to, as to what what that and is, or you leave it blank, just straight thing. So the second part of this is that within X calendar days after the end of the listing period has expired, if somebody brought, you exposed that property to, it could be through another agent. If somebody you expose that property to ends up buying that property, then you are owed that compensation. So the number of calendar days is typically it's equal to the length of the listing. So if you have a 90-day listing, then 90 days after the listing price. But that too is negotiable, that period. And it's important that once this listing, should it not sell within that listing period, once that listing has expired, you're going to have to give to your seller a list of people you've exposed to it. Now, if somebody has written an offer on it, but it wasn't accepted, that's that's one thing. Then you'll have their name, but you should be keeping track of who is looking at that property. Through the buyer's agent. Say, what's your client's name? Write it down. Keep track of it, because you might need to give that name to the seller at the end of the period, because then if within that period that one of those people buy it, you're still owed that compensation. So that's really important. So part 3 is, without broker's prior written consent, the property is withdrawn from sale, otherwise transferred or made unmarketable by a voluntary act of the seller. You're still owed that compensation. Is that hard to do? Absolutely, it's hard to do. So, but it's in there, and you're absolutely entitled to it. So, so 3B, if completion of the sale is prevented by the party to the transaction other than the seller, then compensation which otherwise would have been earned under paragraph 3A should be payable only if and when the seller collects damages. So if the seller goes after a buyer because they didn't perform and they get money in those damages, you're owed your compensation from those damages. That's what that says. And then if 3C, in addition, seller agrees to pay broker and it's blank. Now, several offices, Calabasas is one of them. Uh, I don't think it's been really instituted at Westside, but we give you as the agent have several fees during a transaction. You have a transaction fee, you have a legal risk management fee in Calabasas, I know for sure, and you pay a transaction coordinator. So those are your responsibilities. If you want to move those responsibilities over to the seller, have them paid by the seller, this is where you can do that. So in this blank right here, you would say that in addition, the seller agrees to pay broker you add up those fees, and I believe it adds up to 575. Maybe it's different in every office, but you add up those fees, 575 flat fee commission. So I'm going to write it out. Flat fee commission. And this is very important. It's a flat fee commission. It's not an administrative fee. It's not nothing like that. It is a commission. So they're paying 6% plus a flat fee commission of 575. And from this flat fee commission, you can pay an in-house TC, you can pay your transaction fee, and you can pay your legal risk management fee. So that that allows you to do that. If you're fine paying those fees and you don't want to put that over to your client, that's fine. Leave it blank. All right. So and then next is where you're going to offer the compensation to the other broker, and like I said, it's a minimum of 2.5%. It is, if you get 6%, do you have to split that in half and give 3% to the cooperating broker? No. As long as it's 2.5%, you can take the difference. So you can take my math isn't working right now, but anyways. So then you as long as it's 2.5%, there you go. So here we go. The seller hereby irrevocably assigns the broker the above compensation. Broker may submit this agreement as instructions to compensate broker. So this will be your evidence to escrow or to anybody as to what the agreement is. And then the seller represents he has not entered into a listing agreement with another broker. This is important. If it has been previously listed, you need to know that. So your seller should be telling you that, and you would put that brokerage in there. And then if that other broker gave your client a list of the people they exposed that property to, this is where those names would go. Or if it's a long list, you would put an addendum. You would attach an addendum. So if the property is sold to anyone listed above, the seller is obligated to compensate another broker. Broker is not entitled to compensation under this agreement. Okay. So, and very important, broker is not obligated to represent seller in such transaction. Basically, this is saying, look, that other broker is owed this compensation. You now need to work with that broker on this sale because they're the ones who's getting the money. So the second page is items excluded and included. You would write that down. Leased item, very important. as to know if there are leased items on a property, because that could be a deal breaker. And especially if those leased items are liens, those also need to know that too. So here talks about the multiple listing service and the MLS. So it tells what the MLS is, and here is where you would put your MLS for Long Beach, CR MLS, for Calabasas, ChrisNets, for West Side, that would be Claw, or the MLS, either one would be. So that's where you would put what MLS you want. So, and then it talks here about the benefits of the MLS. So the MLS exposes the property to such a bigger pool. I know that a lot of agents likes to exclude from the MLS and market it themselves, trying to get a buyer on themselves. But really, and there are some legitimate reasons why somebody would want it excluded from the MLS. If they're celebrities, they don't want their property on the MLS. There's many different reasons. So those are legitimate reasons. But really, to get the best price, you want the biggest pool. So basically, this is telling the seller that exact thing, is that if you exclude it, you have a reduction in exposure. And here's where the seller initials, and here is where it says broker / agent initials. It's sufficient that just you as the agent, if this is your listing, you can initial this. It does not need to be initialed by your broker. So, because I can't tell you how many of these I get initialed. Now, starting May 1st, we had what was called clear cooperation, and MLS rules require that a residential real property of 1 to 4 units or vacant land be submitted to the MLS within 1 business day of public marketing. Now, public marketing is marketing outside of your brokerage. So if you're in Calabasas, it's marketing outside of the Calabasas office. If it's West Side, outside the West Side office, and if it's Coastal Properties, it's outside of that office, because those are different corporations. There are brokerages that have the same broker. Compass has the same broker for every single Compass office throughout the state of California. So they can exclude it from the MLS and market it to the whole of California and not be in violation of clear cooperation. So just to be clear, if it's publicly marketed outside of that office within 1 business day, it has to go in the MLS. And this is very important to explain to your seller, because a lot of people will say, well, my seller didn't know and he blasted it on Facebook. Well, your seller needs to know, because it doesn't matter. The minute that it's blasted on Facebook, that has to go into the MLS. So that exclusion is null and void, even though your seller may want it. It has to go into the MLS, because there are steep fines in some MLSs for violating this rule. I'm not going to. They're two different. Every MLS is having their own rules, so I don't want to confuse you by going over what the individual fines are. You can contact me, and I can tell you what they are. But there are some that are very, very steep. So you cannot violate this rule. So public marketing is basically marketing outside of your brokerage, putting a sign out, digital marketing, social media, putting it on third-party third-party websites like Zillow's and Trulia and all those. That's public marketing. Anything that that is shown to the public outside of your individual brokerage. So that's what public marketing. So it talks about the addition of the coming soon. And once again, different MLSs have different rules for coming soon. You know, you know, whether it can be shown, whether it can't be shown. So you need to know the rules for your individual MLS. So here's where seller instructs the broker to market the property to the public and start marketing the property when. And that you can put a date there, or you can leave it blank. It doesn't really matter. What matters is number two, if you don't want it marketed to the property, you are excluding it from the MLS, and then you will have to fill out a form called the SELM, which is the seller excludes the listing from the multiple listing service. So that's, and here, clear cooperation does not apply. I don't know where it wouldn't apply, except if it wasn't residential one before. If it was commercial, it doesn't apply. But also here, MLS data on the internet. You know, once it goes out on the internet, you know, a lot of sellers or buyers after a property closes, I want my listing gone from everywhere. I want the pictures pulled. The pictures, certain MLSs, they control their MLS. Yes, the pictures can be pulled with the exception of one exterior picture. But a lot of times you're going to have to contact your MLS in order to do that. But as far as removing it from Zillow and all of those, we have no control over that. I mean, a lot of this stuff is out there and it's out there forever. And unfortunately, we can do the best we can do, but we can't guarantee that it will disappear from the internet, because nothing disappears from the internet. You know, MLS data on the internet, I do want to point out that data is really important to us. How do we do comps? We do comps by you know, other solds. So if things are excluded from the MLS, we're not going to see those properties. It's really important that whatever you put in the MLS is correct. You know, the square footage, the bedrooms, you know, all of that, the price. So many agents, you know, there was a price change in the middle of a transaction, and then they never change it in the MLS, and it closes with the wrong price. That stuff is really important, and we are the keepers of that information. That's our value, and we use that information. So make sure that the information that's in there is really correct. There's another form called the SELI, sellers exclude listing from internet. And if your seller doesn't want it to go to the Zillows or the Trulias or all those, you would fill out that form, the SCLI. That's an important thing to know also. Seller's representation, they're not in default, that they have the right to sell it. That's all there in seller's representations. Brokers and sellers' duties. You know, we're going to do our due diligence to sell it, to market it, to find a ready, willing, and able buyer. You know, we have to present all offers unless the seller instructs you in writing that I don't want to see any offers under asking. They put that in writing. Somebody calls you and says, or submits an offer, under asking, guess what? I'm sorry, I've been instructed by my seller not to present any offers under asking. You, that's the only case where you are relieved from presenting an offer. Otherwise, you present any and all offers. So, and that's also an MLS rule. If you're going to attach um, any reports that or the sellers agreed to do any reports like pest control or any inspections, um, you know uh, a lot of agents like their sellers to do reports beforehand. It's not a bad idea, but here's the thing: if I was a buyer, if I'm representing the buyer, I'm not going to rely on a report that was presented to me by a seller and paid for by a seller using a company that the seller used. And you, as the buyer's agent, should be instructing your client to not rely on any reports that they haven't initiated, they haven't paid for, that person isn't working for them. You know, um, once again, when it says structural pest control, it's common practice a lot that the buyer asks for the seller to do a termite report in the RPA, and I have to say it right here again. I do not recommend termite pest control should not be a part of the purchase agreement because once it's there, the lender is going to want to see a clear report, and if there's damage and the seller and the buyer want to work it out by credits, you've taken that possibility away from them. So I don't recommend the seller doing a pest control, and I definitely don't recommend it being in a purchase agreement. Here's the agency relationship thing that we've all been talking about, and the possible dual agency with buyer, competing sellers and buyers. This is the possible representation of more than one buyer or seller. Security and insurance, audio and video. This is very important. Broker is not responsible for any loss or damage to personal or real property. We had an agent whose seller claimed that during an open house things were stolen. We're not responsible for that. Unfortunately, we aren't. We don't have insurance to protect the seller. If they have valuables, they need to hide them. They need to put them away. They need to remove them. Number one thing that's stolen during open houses, medications. So have them remove their medications if they have good drugs. So that's one thing, and it's also talking about audio and visual equipment. Many houses have nanny cams. Many houses have Ring doorbells. This was put into this contract because of um, a case that happened in Northern California where a buyer was going through a house talking about strategy and how to get the house. And it was determined that they would put this initial offer in, but then they would go up to this amount. Well, then guess what the counter was? That amount, because the seller watched the tape and listened to what they said. So always if you're representing a buyer walking through a house, always be aware of your surroundings, be aware of that you may be listened to. Okay. So this is photographs and internet advertising. Photographs on once again, a lot of people don't want photographs of their house out. Even a seller can refuse to have pictures. Like I said, the only thing that's required is one exterior shot on the MLS. Key safe. If you're going to put a key safe out, there's a separate form that should be signed by the seller, and that's the KLA, the key safe and lockbox addendum. So sign if the seller doesn't want to sign. We're equal housing opportunity. We don't discriminate. Attorney's fees, any action, the prevailing person gets the fees. If we're adding any addendums or if it's a trust, you would add it, or an REO, short sale. If it's contingent on the purchase of a replacement property, make sure that's a part of this agreement. So manager approval. Little known fact is that management uh, can say no to a deal. This is all subject to manager approval. So if you're going to be that if the only way you're going to get this listing is if you offer the seller 3% commission total, so you're doing it for if you're doing it for a small percentage, if you have to share it with somebody else, go to your manager beforehand, get that approved beforehand. They should know that before, because it has to be approved. So if there is a dispute from this from this agreement, we agreed to mediate first. It used to be arbitration was a part of this agreement, but that has been taken out. If we want to add it, you would have to add Form ARB. So this is the entire agreement. Everything that's here. The seller warns that they can sell it. If it's held in a trust, then they need to do a representative capacity, which basically it states who the authorized signer is for that trust. So we all sign it. You, as the agent, can sign this document on behalf of the brokerage. It doesn't have to be signed by the broker. So the sellers, and if there's more than one seller, then there's an additional signature addendum if there's more than two sellers, there's spaces for two sellers. So if there's more than two sellers, then there's the additional signature addendum. And then also, if two brokers from different companies are co-listing, that's possible. So there's an additional broker acknowledgement. So there you have it. Seller's advisory. This is the disclosures to the seller. Talks about death on the premises. If somebody's died on the premises within the last 3 years, that seller needs to disclose that. If it's a condominium, all sorts of things, governmental required stuff, lead-based paint, the usual. There's repetition in real estate and in our forms. We go over the same facts over and over again. You'll see them in the purchase agreement. You'll see them in the statewide disclosures and all that. California Consumer Privacy Act advisory. All you're doing is you're advising the client of the new law that went into effect on January 1st. In regards to disclosing about their personal information. Most of our offices aren't really affected by the California Consumer Privacy Act, but this is just a disclosure about the Privacy Act. So it should be given to your client to sign. So that's the whole listing agreement. So I did want to go over in this time of COVID. I wanted to go over There we go. I wanted to go over what other things we had to add in regards to COVID. And along with your listing agreement, you should also be doing the listing agreement coronavirus addendum or amendment. It's an addendum when it's attached to the listing agreement. It's an amendment when it's added after the fact. So we are going to always add it with the agreement, and and uh, so that it is an addendum. So this is pretty straightforward. The broker, the seller, the address. This explains about COVID-19, the coronavirus, and um, you know that we as the broker and the agents will comply with all the directives. Different cities have their own laws and their own directives as far as showings and or anything like that. Property showings. This is the first thing that your seller has to decide in regards to coronavirus, and when they're selling their house, are they going to allow people to view it, to physically come to the property and look at it? So if they do, then you don't have to check anything. If they don't want people um, coming to the property, then it refers you to a paragraph later, which we'll go over when we get there. So we're all going to assume they want to list their house. They want to show it. So then we go put prospective purchase visitors will not be given permission to enter until they sign a PED. A PED-V actually. We all have heard about the PEDs. And then they have another couple of choices. If your seller wants them to provide verification that they can financially purchase the property, then they can choose that, or that they can represent that they have previously viewed the property online. That can also be a condition for them coming to the property and looking at it. So those are two options. In regards to marketing the property, the seller needs to agree to give you permission to market it. And marketing involves a whole lot of activities. Putting up a sign, staging, doing your Avid, taking photos, all that stuff. So they either agree or not agree to doing that. And if they only want certain things, I'll only let you take photos, then you can limit it to just that. Now, after they get an offer and they accept it, then there's a whole bunch of other things that go on. There's inspections, there's appraisals. They have to agree to that also. And at any point, if they don't agree, then it refers them to paragraph 4. So basically, if you don't agree to this, Mr. Seller, you're limiting my ability to sell your house. And it may be, to your disadvantage. You may not get the price you want because of it, because you're limiting it. Well, maybe you may want to draft some other agreement between, to take into effect the restricted access to the property. And Mr. Seller, you need to seek the advice of an attorney if you're going to draft something. So it's basically saying, if you're not going to let me do my job, then I'm limited in doing my job, and I may not get you the money that I can get you for this property. So in regards to showings, there are guidelines to show it. They are attached. I'll show you them in a bit. The requirements is that properties must be equipped with proper sanitizing products, including hand sanitizer. It says disinfecting wipes, but nobody can find this. There was a story on Good Morning America this morning about they figured that we won't have disinfecting wipes until 2021 because of what they're made of, and that material goes to the face masks for the hospitals and all that. So you won't see Clorox wipes until 2021. Don't even look for them. But it says it in there, face coverings, but you can have a solution of bleach and water and paper towels. You can get around the disinfect. There's a whole bunch of homemade remedies on the internet. So, but just be aware. Make sure that your seller is fine with that. There's no allergies, any of that. So you're gonna make sure that this stuff is there on your property, on the property. And showing requirement costs, here is where you can push the cost over to your seller. So by checking that. Cleaning and sanitizing. Commonly touched areas shall be cleaned, disinfected before and after each showing. Now, the new regulations state that the person who's showing it is now required to do that cleaning and disinfecting. So just be aware of that. And if you are showing property, make sure that cabinets are open, doors are open. You don't want people touching things. They should walk through it, look through it, don't touch. Look, don't touch. Okay. So, and here's another cleaning and sanitizing cost. If you're going to hire a company to clean and sanitize it, which I don't know if you can hire somebody to do it after everything, but if you're doing a scheduled showings, by appointment only, possible you can hire somebody for that time period to go in and clean that in between the showings, and then you're good to go, and you can push that cost over to the seller. Temporary withdrawal of property from the market. So this is where, if this was after the listing agreement, you would check this, and you're now extending the listing the amount of days you're withdrawing it from the market. Additional terms, I don't know what additional terms you would really put there. Things don't come to my head right now. And then you sign that. So here is what your seller needs to sign, and this is the PED-S. The seller needs to sign, and if it's tenant occupied, all of the tenants need to sign it. So, and this is authorizing showings to happen. So it advises them of the government order, the seller and the occupant advisory in regards to coronavirus. They acknowledge that no written materials or brochures. None of that is going to be at the property. You can't have any of that at the property. The signer represents that that they understand that they're allowing access to the property. It may be dangerous, it may be unsafe. To the best of your knowledge, you're not currently affected with COVID. To the best of your knowledge, you're not knowingly within the last 14 days been in contact with anybody. You are not experiencing a fever. You understand that people may be affected with COVID. They may not exhibit signs. And the very important thing is that you will inform the broker if after you sign this, your health changes. It's very important. It has to be disclosed. So minor occupants, the seller or the tenant is is making those representations on behalf of the minor occupants. Exceptions to the representations and additional terms. Exemptions are such as, say your seller is a doctor, say your seller is a nurse in ICU. That person is exposed to people with with this disease, so that should be disclosed. So here is the mandatory showing requirements. It gives all the rules for the listing and the buying agent, talks about the cleaning and disinfecting. The one thing I want to point out is rules for everybody. All visitors must wear face coverings for individuals with disabilities who cannot wear a face covering or face shield. The showing agent will engage in an interactive process with the individual to discuss any available reasonable accommodations. What are those reasonable accommodations? Nobody knows. So it's have a conversation, make your sellers aware. It's always up to the seller whether to allow that person to visit that property or not. I know that we're up against a 5 o'clock, so I want to go and see if there are any questions right here that I can answer really quickly. Patricia, is there anything? Patricia, hello, Bueller. Let me go to all right, let me go to Facebook and see if, okay, does the seller have to, okay, does the seller have to sign the Corona form each time before the showing? No, the seller does not. The seller does not. But the seller has to make you aware of any changes in their health. Once they've signed it once, they don't have to sign it again. I do want to say about the PED-V form. Everybody who goes into that property has to sign a PED-V form. And that PED-V form should be within the last 24 hours. So if it's any later than that, then they have to do another one. So because what you're doing is you're telling the seller that as of this moment, this is my health condition. So if it's older than 24 hours, we need a new one. And if somebody visits that property more than once, then they will have to do one for each day. So I answered, where can we find the parcel number? How can we start with the seller for commission? How can we start? I'm not really understanding that question, Bruce. Where do we start as to the amount? If that's your question, Bruce, then I would say, customary is 6%. I would start there. So I hope that was your question and that I answered it. Let's see. I don't see any more. Oh, wait. Negotiate. How do you start negotiating? Is that what you're saying, Bruce? Uh, how to negotiate? You'll get better at it. You start. All you do is you say, it's customary for 6%. For the 6%, I work I will work and work and work for you. I've got marketing. I will market this thing on the internet. I will market it all over the place. I pay for the pictures. I pay for the marketing. I schedule the appointments. In this era, you don't do open houses, but you schedule a whole bunch. There's a lot of coordinating of people. There's a lot of rules, and I'm going to work hard for you, and you'll get better at it. It's a process. So it's 5 o'clock, and I know that there's another meeting after this. So I'm going to. If you have any questions, my email is richpisani@kw.com. So email me. I'm more than happy to help you out with anything that you need. All right. I hope it was informative. I actually thought it wasn't going to take this long, so I thought I'd have more time. But thank you for joining me, and I will see you in a few weeks.